Welcome to Meteor Interviews, a series of interviews with Meteor developers. My name is Paul Dowman. This podcast is produced by OKGrow. We build web and mobile apps for clients using Meteor. You can find us at okgrow.com. Today I'm speaking with James Gillmore. So James has been doing a lot of writing on the Meteor forums and on Medium about how Meteor fits in with the emerging ecosystem of React, Redux, and Relay. And so I think I have a lot to learn, and a lot of Meteor developers do as well. So James, can you introduce yourself and just kind of like give us a bit of a background on how you've come to be into all this stuff right now?
Okay, how's it going, everybody? My name is James Gillmore. I've been with Meteor for 3.5 years, pretty much since the beginning. I've been running a boutique agency, pretty much myself and a few guys, for the last 10 years. Started out doing product management and worked my way, kind of following a similar trajectory to a lot of people, from PHP to Rails and now on to Meteor. So basically, kind of where I'm at is, okay, maybe it's time for me to level up my skills and capabilities one more time, maybe leave Meteor, or maybe help refine the ecosystem. And so the last 2 months I've spent basically analyzing all the functional stuff that's influencing the current direction with React. So that includes things like Elm, Cycle, ClojureScript, and Ohm, pretty much those three things. And I got a lot to share about those. And in short, everything's changing drastically right now. We're basically in a state of flux. It's kind of funny that Facebook came up with a product called Flux because it put the whole industry into a state of flux.
It did.
So I'm here to answer any questions about current trends.
Yeah, it really did. So, I mean, I think the first thing we should talk about is like maybe just a bit of an overview of the React ecosystem. So there's obviously there's React, the UI layer, but then there's other things, Redux, GraphQL, Relay. So let's explain those one at a time. So maybe you could explain what Redux is and how it fits in with like Meteor. Okay,
so basically React came out with a very slick view rendering system, right? And one of the main points it hits on is taking state and creating, which the term they basically popularized. I don't think before they were saying state all the time. Vue developers were saying state. They were simply dealing with the problems of not thinking about it as state. So what Facebook came in with React did is make you think about a state as one thing, and the best way to describe that is a single source of truth, right? So basically React initially lets you control the state within each one of your components, and everything renders unidirectionally from essentially the top component all the way down, like it trickling through a tree. Where Redux comes in is it essentially takes any need for state in React, within React components. Although Facebook did a good job of making it a single source of truth, it's kind of mixed up in between components, and you still can get really messy. So what Redux did, and they're copying things from functional programming, is make a single state atom separately with stores and actions, and essentially let React components subscribe to it. So Redux essentially upped the ante on React, on what React was doing in terms of creating a single source of truth. Redux really just made it a true single source. I don't know if that's fully clear, maybe.
Right, and so a lot of people might have heard of Flux. So Redux is one person's implementation of the Flux architecture, maybe a little bit simplified, and it's not an official Facebook thing.
I'm basically using Redux and Flux synonymously, and Redux is pretty much taken over as the winner-takes-all approach to handling Redux. To handling the Flux pattern.
Right. Okay, and then GraphQL and Relay. Let's talk about those. Just a quick overview.
Well, those are the things that I'm really interested in, and the reason is because Redux is really good at UI state. It's not good at domain state. So domain state, basically pertains to your models. Like, and typically you'll have a database, one table in a database that's like posts or articles, and then another one that's comments and users, right? So each one is the model. And where Meteor and Minimongo always succeeded was they were really, really good at dealing with domain state, i.e. these collections and their models, right? Okay, so Redux came around and the Meteor community has been like totally flipped upside down and trying to figure out what it is. But Redux only really succeeds at UI state. So that UI state is like a search field that you fill in. That state that's never sent down to the database, right?
Right.
Where Relay comes in is it's to fill the gap and do what we always did really well with Mini Mongo and PubSub and all that, live query, etc. And I got some really good things going on with that, but the idea is currently Relay only handles domain state. So that means currently if you were to use Relay, which I don't even know anybody that really is, because it's extremely complicated, you'd be using Relay for domain state, Redux for UI state, or if you're like how everybody's doing it now, you're using Redux for UI state and domain state, which is not really suited for. But what Relay stated goals is essentially to move into a direction where it can do everything that Redux does. And sure, we're in a state of flux because we don't have that yet, but we know that's coming. I don't want to build an app right now knowing that Relay is going to do it better, knowing that Ohm Next, which is still kind of an alpha stage, is already doing all these things. And when you use Ohm Next for ClojureScript, you don't use a Redux and a Relay. You use one system stating your queries and mutations, and you can and because of the way their database Atomic works, you can time travel the server and the client, and you can get both UI state and domain state.
So just to get another definition out of the way, you talked about Ohm Next. So let's explain what that is and how it fits in.
Cool. My bad. I'm a little rusty in the interview thing, so I got a lot to say.
There's a huge amount of stuff going on right now, and like all of it is kind of related. And I think a lot of Meteor developers are just like, I've heard of all these things, but how should I be using it? So what's Ohm?
Okay, Ohm and Ohm Next, or let's just start with Ohm. Ohm's been out for 2 years. It is essentially React and ClojureScript. It renders to React. And if you're not sure what ClojureScript is essentially the Clojure language created by Rich Hickey. He created Clojure in 2007. It rendered, and that originally, it's a hosted language. Clojure originally runs in Java, and they made ClojureScript, and it's the same language. One of the few things that's missing from the main Clojure that runs in JavaScript. And therefore, since it's done so well, you can run React in it. So they provide an interface to run React in the ClojureScript language. In addition, ClojureScript is a functional language. It's not as purely functional as Elm and Haskell, but it's fantastic in that it lets you mix and match both, which is a perfect perfect progression for JavaScript developers who are used to objects. So you can use object stuff in ClojureScript. But it has first-class support for functional programming as well, which you don't really have in JavaScript.
Right, and it's been a very, it's been React. It uses React, but it seems like some of the ideas. It seems like they've sort of like taken some of the more radical ideas a little bit earlier, and then those ideas seem to be making their way out into the JavaScript mainstream now, or at least into the React community, which is probably maybe the bleeding edge, not the mainstream, but yeah. Exactly.
It in fact looks like they're kind of sharing both ways. Like Ohm will take a little bit from React, and React will take a little bit from Ohm. It's not just all like React taking purely from the functional languages. It's a little sharing of each. So basically, Ohm is built in ClojureScript, and ClojureScript is a language that transpiles to JavaScript. ClojureScript came from Clojure, which is it's a hosted language that runs on the JVM. So essentially both languages are hosted. Ohm Next is a framework built on top of ClojureScript, and it essentially transpiles to React using React as its renderer. And you can create React components in ClojureScript. Ohm has been around for 2 years. React, I think, like 2.5, approaching 3 maybe. And essentially, Ohm Next is the latest version of Ohm, and it's learned a lot from React. React's learned a lot from them. They've learned a lot from each other. And it seems that Ohm Next, maybe because it has a smaller community, is able to move faster, right? So it's doing a lot of the things, or at least working on a lot of things that Relay hasn't even started to think about yet, or at least promote that they're going to do it. One of those being supporting multiple data sources. So one of the big challenges with Relay and Redux is that Relay seems like it's really good for domain state. That's like your models and your collections, for example, posts, articles, comments, right? And Redux seems like it's really good for UI state. Like if you have a search field and you need to fill it out, you're never going to save what the person searched, or at least unless for Google. And a lot of people are essentially struggling with Redux and Flux pattern to make it mold to handling domain state right now, when that's really not what it's good for. It doesn't really let you create really good models that represent an object of from your collections, right?
Right.
So, but Relay does. Relay lets you model your whole database very well. In addition, Relay could be essentially, Redux is essentially a subset of Relay, and that's what OhmNext realized. And they're letting you use the same interface with multiple data sources. So that could be a client-only cache, like Redux is primarily used for, even though it can be used server-side as part of server-side rendering, but that's something else. And it can be used for domain state with their Datomic database, which is extremely good. It's very much like the turning the database inside out database. It's kind of observables all the way down. We'll talk about that later, but the idea is that Meteor had to use LiveQuery and essentially do some hacks with the oplog to facilitate subscriptions, versus what Datomic, a Clojure script, a database built in Clojure by the creators of Clojure and ClojureScript, that is essentially built for the architecture of subscriptions from the ground up. So OhmNext lets you not only query your UI cache, your something like Minimongo, something like Redux, but it also lets you query domain state on the database. And that's something that Relay has yet to do. Relay doesn't support multiple data sources. In addition, Relay is very, very verbose. Datomic is a lot less verbose, and because it's not trying to interface with multiple languages like GraphQL. GraphQL is a specification that lets you query data no matter what database you want to plug into it on the server, Mongo, SQL, whatever. Obviously, and OhmNext only using Datomic, so that gives it some benefit in terms of the complexity and verbosity is needed to get it running. Mm-hmm. So that's the idea, the benefits of OhmNext. Okay.
And so for the typical Meteor developer right now, like I think a lot of people are reading all this talk on the forums about not just React, but about Redux and all these other things, and they're sort of probably wondering like, all right, so is this stuff coming to Meteor? Should I be using this? Like, should I care what Flux is and building my app this way? So maybe like I'm curious for your opinion on that first of all, and also keeping in mind that like not every Meteor developer has the same goals. So I think like the reasons why a lot of people like Meteor is that it's easy to learn, easy to get something built quickly that's pretty sophisticated. So like we get all this stuff like pretty much for free, like optimistic updates of the data, like latency compensation, right? And then there's other people that are already on the bleeding edge just for fun. But for the typical Meteor developer who just wants to get work done, but doesn't want to like end up, not using
the wrong stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So which of these things do you think are going to make their way into the Meteor world, and like what are the options for doing that?
Got you. So what I hear you first saying is let's set a base assumption for our audience, the type of developer, somebody that wants to be cutting edge enough that they're not just going to fall behind, but not maybe necessarily so much that they need to use the craziest stuff, or maybe that they don't have the most complex needs. So that some of these, I think what you're also implying, what you're saying was that React assumes that you're Facebook trying to build support extreme scalability and maintainability between lots of developers working on it. And that may not be the typical Meteor developer. The Meteor developer wants to be using the advanced stuff, but they also may not be the target market that needs to be that wants to put themselves through all the hoops of the complexity of React and essentially Redux. Yeah. And just state what that is currently for Redux. That's now you got to create action creators rather. You got to create reducers, and then you got to essentially subscribe the stores that the reducers reduce to your component. So that's like 3-4 extra steps, albeit some like the action creators and the subscription parts are really small. You're basically just creating reducers. But there can be some complexities in async actions, and that doesn't it's been hard to test those, and until a recent product called Saga, by the way, which uses generators so you can test each part of an async action. But there's a bunch of extra steps, and that's not what Meteor developers have been used to. Mm-hmm. We've been used to the extreme utmost simplicity of transparent reactive programming. Right. And that's a term that us as Meteor developers I never heard about. I didn't even know that was the name. Maybe I just missed it, but it hasn't been thrown around that much in a long time. I learned that term recently when I was looking at a React add-on called Mobservable, which essentially takes the same Meteor reactivity model and puts it in React. I essentially did the same thing with my package Tracker React, which is like the get Meteor data mix-in, but you don't need to manually and explicitly specify your data sources. You can rather use it transparently like we always have within your render or your template, within your render method or template. So what I mean by transparent is basically you can get a value out of a session. You could return an object or a cursor of objects from a collection and iterate through them and display them, and it will just stay up to date automatically. You don't have to do anything else. That's as opposed to React, where you got to do like 3 other steps to wire it. So from top to bottom, left to right, it renders unidirectionally. And that's still a beautiful thing. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. So these developers are like, oh my God, it was so easy before. Now it's so complicated, I don't get it. Here's the first thing to understand is that the React is selling to the people that came out to solve the problems of essentially the jQuery world before. They weren't like trying to solve the Blaze problems. We were already several steps ahead. So React essentially is solving the problem of using jQuery to manipulate 4 places in the DOM, for example, that are all utilizing the same sort of data. For example, if you like, here's the canonical example, essentially. If you like something and it says your name, somewhere else it says a like count, and in the top right corner it has like a red bubble for a notification. Each one of these things are basically all connected to one source of truth, one piece of data, whether you liked something or not, basically. Right. Whereas in the past in jQuery, somebody liked something, then you got to go traverse the DOM in 3 other places to make it reflect the click you just did. Now that's called imperative programming. There's a bunch of different steps you got to do, and you got to keep them all in sync. And often they would get unsync, and it would say the like count here is 2, and over there it represents 3. So that's where Facebook came in with React and using a single source of truth approach, where all you got to do is essentially tell the database that you have the client cache version of the database that you have 3 likes, and then everywhere else that declaratively references it will stay up to date. Well, guess what? Blaze has always had that if you're using mini Mongo in session. So when React came out, everybody's like, why do I need this? We already have it. In fact, we're already easier than that. So that's where people started to realize that we did have problems of our own. They weren't the initial worst problems that React came out to solve of the yesteryear problems of jQuery of the past, but they nevertheless were there. It's still very hard to
So what are those problems? Like, I mean, some people are exploring using Redux versus, say, Tracker. So like, what do you get for that added complexity, and like, what are the problems that it's solving?
The problems that it's solving is essentially maintainability, and it's been really hard because at the same time that it solves a problem, it has you do all these extra steps. So that's what sent me in a tailspin and made me spend a bunch of time, months, trying to figure out exactly what's better or worse. But the idea is you can track from left to right, top to bottom, exactly what's happening, and you're able to just imagine debugging a stacked frame in Chrome, and you're able to step through each thing and find out where the problem happens. Whereas in Blaze, you still could be using a reactive dict over here, a session over here, another reactive dict over here, a session over here, and then reactive var within your template instance, and you get lost in spaghetti code. So React lets you think more of like a linear trajectory, and you could supposedly more easily spot where the problem was, even though now there's a bunch more code to even sort through.
Right. So you're talking about the fact that to change your application state in using Redux, you're writing pure functions that each one has no side effects. It makes the change so you can step forward and backwards through them, which as you said, might involve writing a bit more boilerplate code, but there's something really nice about that. So we're kind of coming closer to functional programming. Maybe that's the thing that people like the most about it.
I would say that definitely is. That's 100% what they like the most about it, is that there's no side effects if done right. Obviously, it's not a true functional language or pure functional language like Elm or Haskell. Even ClojureScript isn't, but it's easier in ClojureScript. So you couldn't. What I'm saying is you could introduce side effects anywhere. But if you're disciplined enough, the idea is there's no side effects introduced anywhere, and you're not going to be debugging your code for 4 hours to find some mutation of outside source. You can just basically test the inputs and outputs of each function. And that's the big selling point of all of this.
Right. But it's a bit more work maybe. So do you think in in a year from now, do you think that Redux or some other type of flow architecture will be a part of Meteor, or do you think that we'll just they'll go in two separate ways?
Well, Meteor's in an interesting place right now because they don't have necessarily the resources of Facebook. They got their major paid product, which they've been working towards for 4 years, Galaxy, and that has to work properly. I don't see them as I don't see the top guys over there really devoting the mind power to push a lot of this stuff, and I don't see them wanting to either. Reason being is that the whole ecosystem, the greater NPM ecosystem outside of Meteor is already tackling it. So it's why they're thinking, why do we want to tackle this when they're already tackling it, and we could be kind of the Google to Yahoo, come and learning from their mistakes and then just get it right. And I feel like Meteor, I forget who was before Meteor, but I think Meteor always kind of did that. Learn from others, and it's a smart approach. Why be the one to pioneer something only to fall off, and then a better approach just quickly in a quarter of the time learns from all your mistakes? I think that's what they want to do, and I've asked a lot. I don't know if you've seen my posts lately. Jeff Schmidt the other day on Friday, came out of his shell and started talking to us again, which is good. But I think what's kind of assumed is that they're not really devoting much to pushing anything forward right now. They got a couple people looking into, I think they got Sashko looking into GraphQL on this. That's what he said. He told in the public post forum, he said Sashko and Justin Santa Barbara are essentially scouts looking into the whole GraphQL pub sub future. So the impression I get is that they're not that they are not ready to start building anything new yet. I don't think that Meteor's really interested in being a big pioneer like they originally were with Tracker. They really came through and represented when they came out with Tracker and did something. I don't think they want to be doing what Facebook's doing. I don't think they have what it takes to do what Facebook's doing right now, inventing stuff.
No.
Or at least, yeah.
But I wonder if maybe they're. I mean, I think what you said is kind of right, and it's like that they are also looking at their role as curating good parts of the rest of the community as well. Embrace the ecosystem is one of the core principles, or it always has been. So
if they get the NPM modules down 100 some point, and I don't think it will be in 1.3 even, but once they do, then they'll be poised to do that really well.
Yep. Okay, so you just touched on GraphQL and Relay and pub sub versus I think that's versus what's the alternative, right? Making requests and pulling data as needed, right?
The old way, yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Where does that even fit in? There's a lot of talk about GraphQL, but Meteor. So maybe tell us a bit about how that's different from the way Meteor does things.
Well, I mean, to me, the biggest idea behind GraphQL is that it lets you perpetuate a new way of doing things consistently, being that you can plug any database into it. Being that you can plug any database into it, it's going to be a lot of work and messiness for anybody that wants to use it. And for Meteor, where all we ever used was Mongo, it's another quandary, just like Redux. It's just like these things are awesome, but to us, they come with extra negatives. It's like, okay, we got to wrap all our Mongo stuff on it. Now we have this new interface, but then maybe we even wrap a Mongo interface on the client on top of what we wrapped, and we're just getting to. That means we just get to take advantage of GraphQL when there's no even ecosystem to even take advantage of yet. But you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So GraphQL, but what Facebook's trying to do is Relay. It's more important. It's where they're using GraphQL, and they made it all specification so that it can kind of take over. And that's what they've done really well. Everything they're doing is like launching these specifications. And as you saw earlier today, Aeronota launched that specification because he obviously pinpointed the value in launching a specification.
Yep, mantra.
Yeah, you launch these specifications. In a way, it essentially gets usage. It gets people to be able to use it because it's not just dogmatic about what tools you got to use.
Yep.
So GraphQL is not dogmatic about your database, but really the concept I think they're trying to push is Relay. And that concept is several things. One of the things is not having to make many round trips, right? So you have all these components, and their queries are all static, and you can statically collect all of the queries that are going to be needed when you enter a route, basically, and make one request and get all the data for your entire tree of components. That's the main idea about it. And that's a great idea. So that's what everything's going towards. As far as Meteor, I don't think we don't need GraphQL. We don't need it. We think we might end up using it because there's all these other tools that are going to come out of the GraphQL Relay ecosystem. So it would be smart. Yeah, but we could have. Yeah,
it will be a standard, and it's also kind of an easy way for them to maybe get out of this problem of how they're going to support more databases than just Mongo, right? Because like right now, I think they like a year ago, they started looking at how multiple databases would work, and they built the mini Redis, and so that kind of gave us the impression that like everything that they do would have a mini whatever it is on the client side, and then as they started looking into what it would take to do that for SQL, they kind of realized maybe that's not the best approach, or it would be really difficult to do that really well. And so GraphQL, I think, might actually be not a bad thing to have in for them to kind of like, first of all, embrace the rest of the ecosystem, but also kind of like abstract away, like maybe a more officially, like a more standard way of like abstracting away, or of what the query language looks like on the client side. So, but then what about pub sub? So like one of the benefits of Meteor that I don't know is if it's really easy to get still with anything else, or at least with the React ecosystem, or like Relay and these things is the push part of it. So let's talk about that.
The push part, as far as I can see, there's never been anything that comes close to Meteor. All there ever has been Firebase, which is closed source, and that's only it's basically only the database portion of the framework. It's not the full framework with methods and et cetera, et cetera. There was Derby when we first came out, but where is Derby now? I don't even. That doesn't count. Okay, that's out of the picture. Okay, so what's new? What we can do it now? Rethink DB. Okay, you still got to couple it with essentially like Express Web Server and all that.
Right. You still have to send it. You still have to like. That's only the database side. You still have to get that all the way through to the client.
Exactly. Yep. Matt Crick built some boilerplate called Meteor, right? Spelled MEAT as in the food meat eater. Yeah. That does a lot of what Meteor does, and it's fantastic. And if something like that was to pick up steam, it would be a viable option. And there's just a lot that Meteor has. I mean, it was really good what he did, and I actually talked to him a lot and analyzed it, and did fired on all the core points that Meteor did, but with the greater NPM ecosystem available to you. So do you think Meteor, M-E-T-E-O-R, the Meteor that we're all talking about, could become something like that? Like, do you think eventually one day they might just sort of like embrace all the other components from the rest of the world and sort of extend them? Well, that's what GraphQL would do 50% of the way. And That's the real question you're asking about. I actually looked into the code of their Postgres SQL solution and analyzed, put an hour or two in just to figure out why have they not launched this? What is this doing? How does it work? Because, et cetera, et cetera. Mainly, actually, I was researching because I wanted to do it with Mongo and GraphQL and just combine it. And I saw how they're doing it. They're using database triggers to call a function. That was like the kind of the cornerstone, the crux of how they get it done. And they analyze everything coming in, the trigger fires, and then it notifies for all the servers, I assume, in the cluster, or maybe they didn't even get to the supporting clusters. So that's how that works. So this is not even necessarily my expertise, but my assumption is the way you get this done with GraphQL and Mongo is you basically monitor on the web server, all of the inserts, updates, removes, and upserts coming through on all of the servers in the cluster, and they speak to all the other servers via Redis, and they back and forth. They get total subscriptions, and they hold state of that subscription. Okay, we gotta watch out for these type of inserts coming through, and then on the server level, it tells back through Redis all the servers in the cluster. We just got to insert matching your subscription. Here it is, and then all the servers in the cluster can propagate it to their clients. And of course, the server that received the request saves it to the database. That's something I'm not the first one proposed that. People have talked about that. I've wondered for a while if there's any problems there. Like, is that even workable? Can that be done? Because if that can fully be done, I'm not sure why Meteor didn't do it to begin with, but then that would serve as the perfect model for, okay, we take Mongo, we do that with GraphQL, and then we'll already any other database we want to come in, we'll essentially already have half the job done. If that works like that, that's ideal. In addition, here's how I think it should start. We should actually take the live query we currently have and make that work with GraphQL, not the server tier situation I just described where we're subscribing to events, but just make GraphQL resolve functions for each one of your types or whatever. Listen to a live query just so we can get GraphQL working, just so Relay can work, just so we get the ball rolling, just so we can see that this is something we want to use. The one thing holding that up is Relay doesn't officially support subscriptions yet. And I think that's what you pointed was part of the question is, okay, Relay and GraphQL is great and all, but it doesn't even support subscriptions yet. So there's been some proposals. So if we wanted to start now, you would take a proposal of one of them and just hope that interface works and get it done. But the point is there's a bunch of steps to getting this done. And the biggest one is just whether you can even completely manage a database at the web server layer as just described. But that all said, if you can't, but you could do like 80% of it, it would still be great because the real truth is I think what everybody's realized, there's no automatic way for infinite scalability. And that's where GraphQL and Relay try to solve for Facebook. Facebook realized that. They didn't want to make every single collection you made and every field of every collection stay up to date and all that. They made it so that that they could optimize certain queries exactly the way that they want. So that's what it lets you do. I think what should happen is there should be a base thing that works to a minor degree of scalability, and it works with the GraphQL Relay interface. But when you find that one non-scalability kind of problem point, you could dive right in and customize the GraphQL and make that work a different way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the end goal here, because if Meteor cannot make GraphQL work with traditional collections one by one, like we all came from Rails where you just set up a model and it just works, then you're not supporting all these the vast majority of developers who aren't ready to configure GraphQL resolutions, just don't have those skills.
Right. Yep. I'm a big fan of like things just working quickly for most people right out of the box, and then being able to customize it as much as you can. But I do like to have a common starting point because, I find like I teach a Meteor workshop, and I find that like people can actually be really productive after 2 days of teaching.
Hell yeah!
And like that's really amazing, and I would really not want to lose that. And then I think the only problem,
and you do lose that with Relay, React, and GraphQL.
You do. I mean, you'll spend 2 days making decisions about what tools and components you're going to put in. Not components, but what
parts,
you're going to have to decide every part of your stack, right? And you're going to spend probably a couple of days just researching that. So yeah, I mean, I do think it's good to have a good starting point. But I mean, I guess the problem is we just have to make sure that when you start on a new platform, you have to feel confident. When you make a choice of a platform like Meteor, you have to feel confident that it's going to be able to grow with you as your app grows. I think the truth is that most software projects and companies fail not because of anything technical. Mostly they fail because they're building the wrong thing, and being able to get started and iterate quickly is to me probably the single most important thing. But again, you don't want to build on a platform that you're only going to get so far with. Like, you don't want to.
I think we all reach that point with our apps where they do get super huge, and you're just like upset with yourself over certain decisions you've made. There's areas that suck in the code that you wish you could refactor, and you gotta find yourself like making explanations to yourself to other developers, like this area is not as good as I wish it would be.
But in my experience, that's true no matter what you build it on. Even if it's a simple framework like Rails or Meteor, something that's simple to get started with, or even if you like mix and match and pick every single piece at every level of the stack, you're still going to have that problem, I think.
I think Mark Sebastage, I can't remember his exact name, one of the Facebook guys who's famous for a bunch of videos, makes that same point. It's a never-ending moving target. You're basically going to have to pick a place and start at one point anyway.
Is that the minimal API service area talk that you're talking about?
It is minimal. Yeah. Yep, that's it. Yeah.
Right. Like the idea that this is something at Facebook that makes a lot of sense, but I'm not sure so much for myself, but the idea that they're going to have huge code bases that live a long time, and they can survive making no choice and writing a whole lot of boilerplate more easily than they can survive making a bad choice with a bad library or a bad abstraction. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's where we're at with the functional programming, which is more about doing that boilerplate each time than the super high level abstractions of OOP, and that's basically kind of why a lot of people are going to do well by moving to the React ecosystem, because it's not going to be so hard to undo some of those decisions as it will be when it's like, we use Angular and we don't even want to use Angular anymore, and you got to switch the whole thing out.
Yes. At the same time, though, I would also caution anybody starting a new project, especially a startup, to do anything that's going to stop them from iterating and getting started quickly and iterating quickly. So, your technology decisions at the beginning are probably the least important thing. Like eBay they rewrote their app 3 times before 2005 or something. Fully.
Definitely.
So, you can, if your startup will more likely be killed by you building the wrong thing than by you building it with the wrong tool. Like if you get traction with whatever you're building and you end up with the right thing, I think most of those problems will take care of themselves. You can even rewrite it if you need to. So
definitely.
Not that I'm advocating, of course, all of us as craftspeople, we want to make sure we like what we do and want to make sure we're using the best tools. But I guess I would advocate for people to keep that in mind.
I think less and less so. I think in the next year or two, I feel like things are going to level out. That's been my prediction, is that the JavaScript ecosystem is kind of like a tier and a stack of a building that we're building. And we're going to kind of solve all the JavaScript problems that we have been having. React Native, querying the relay stuff in one, no round trips and subscriptions, single source of truth, React. These are all core pillars, right? It's not like there's that much more core pillars that need to be solved in this layer of the stack. And I imagine that we get this all solved really well, in a year even, hopefully a year. And then after that, a whole new set of problems open up, and maybe we can eventually start building the Brett and Victor stuff, because we haven't even done any of that really besides time traveling. You know what I mean? Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting times. So I think this is a very very interesting time to be a JavaScript developer. So that's
my recommendation is just to wait till React's conference on the 22nd, 23rd of February. I think that they're probably going to nail a lot for Relay, and when they nail a lot for Relay, that's going to solidify a lot of things right now. So if you start your Redux app right now, well, you're going to wish you were doing it in Relay come the 22nd, 23rd. That's my prediction.
Interesting. And so for the rest of us with Meteor, we'll just keep on keeping on with Blaze or React and all the other parts of Meteor in the meantime, and we'll see how this goes.
Sounds good, Meteor World.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much, James.
That's it. Thank you.
So if anybody wants to follow the stuff that you've been writing and working on, your open source projects and everything else, where can they find you? Oh,
they can find me at faceyspacey.com, and basically everything I do is like at faceyspacey, although my latest endeavor is called Ultimate.js, so look out for Ultimate.js as well.
On GitHub?
Yep, on GitHub.
Ultimate.js on GitHub. Faceyspacey everywhere else. Meteor forums, Medium. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Paul, for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you liked this show, you can subscribe using iTunes or your favorite podcast app. For more info, visit meteorinterviews.com. To learn more about OK Grow and the work we do, you can find us at okgrow.com.